what about tell me about mitochondrial DNA, what that is and what we're talking about there.
Yeah, so most people, when they hear mitochondria, they go back to high school and think, oh, that's the powerhouse of the cell. And you're right, it is the powerhouse of the cell, but it also has its own type of DNA in it. And so, what we can do with mitochondrial DNA is that we can use it to look at samples that have super degraded or damaged nuclear DNA. So when we're doing typical DNA testing, we're looking at the DNA present in the nucleus, or what, if you go back to high school, like the brain of the cell. So there's one copy of that in the nucleus. In a cell, you have hundreds of mitochondria, and so you have hundreds of copies of mitochondria. So even though that one copy in the nucleus has been damaged, you have tons of copies in the cell of that mitochondrial DNA that you can then make copies of and use it for analysis tools. So like I said, it's usually used in really damaged cells. So you hear a lot about this in human remains. If human remains have been found out, you think it's been there for years, that's a really good way to do it. Research does it a lot. If you're looking at somebody who's doing archaeology, that's how they're usually looking at DNA, is through mitochondrial DNA. And so that's the method that we use when we have tough samples that we know have been damaged or are really old and we need to get a profile from. The one thing I do want to say about mitochondrial DNA is it is not the same as nuclear DNA, as in, when we're talking about nuclear DNA, it's specific to an individual, whereas mitochondrial DNA is specific to the maternal line. So I have two boys. I use my boys probably too much in my testimony to give examples of things. But they have my mitochondrial DNA. So if I were to go through the process and develop a profile of my mitochondrial DNA and their mitochondrial DNA, we would look exactly the same. I would not be able to tell the difference between us three. But if we did autosomal testing or that nuclear DNA testing, I would very easily be able to tell the difference between us three.
Okay. Okay. Is that the same thing as familial DNA?
Familial DNA. So when we're talking about familial DNA, that's getting into the investigative genetic genealogy and looking at SNPs. So SNPs are short nucleotide polymorphisms, and they're just smaller sections in the DNA that are really, really variable. And there's a lot of them. And so we can get a ton of data that we can then use that to search other databases, not CODIS, but other databases, to try and build a family tree and then eventually maybe identify a possible person through that.
I